You know, when we started our center more than 3 years ago, Professor Dolores Foley conducted a really comprehensive needs assessment. Thousands of people contacted. And we asked them what were the most important responsibilities and then those areas for which you feel the greatest deficiencies in terms of training and preparedness. And what emerged was on recovery. And so we've known for more than 3 years that we've got to do something on recovery. And I'm really delighted to introduce our next speaker, Wendy Freitag, who's with the State of Washington, Department of Military Emergency Management Division. Right? But she's had a long career, both with Microsoft, working in global security issues, and then also working with many small businesses and others in this area of disaster recovery. Wendy?
Thank you. I want to thank Carl for bringing me across the pond from Washington State to speak with you all today. And I had to wonder how thorough Carl really is in his planning for this sort of event when I was awoken this morning at 6 a.m. by a very loud alarm informing me that there was an emergency in the hotel and I would need to depart my hotel room. So we trooped out, and of course it was a false alarm, but it did make me wonder and get me in the mode for this conference today. So I'm very excited to be able to come and talk to you about public-private partnerships, and I'm going to hopefully give you a bit of a roadmap on how you can integrate small businesses and why you need to integrate small businesses into your planning process. First of all, I want to say that I'm talking purely from a practitioner standpoint today because in 2007, about June 1st of 2007, I was actually brought into Washington State Emergency Management Division to set up the first corporate outreach, business outreach program for the Washington State Emergency Management Division. And there was really nothing in existence in the state prior to that. And so we kind of started from scratch and set this up, and I had the benefit of working on the private sector side, and previous to that I had worked for FEMA and had been on the ground in disasters across the country. So I think I kind of knew both sides of the coin, so to speak, and knew how we could merge the two sides. And so I'm going to be sharing with you how we built this program from the ground up today and why we felt it was really critical from day one to include small business in this. You see a lot of talk across the United States about private-public partnership programs. But I often visit states and I go to conferences because now FEMA has a component in their program known as the private sector program or division, and I go to conferences and I hear people talk about their programs. When I really look at their programs, a lot of times it's really built around critical infrastructure companies. Critical infrastructure companies are really certainly important. Critical infrastructure is 85% of it is owned by private sector companies across the U.S., but those are the companies that have the resources to go out and hire people to be devoted to planning inside their organizations. They can hire consultants. They have many resources at their fingertips to improve their emergency planning processes. It's the small businesses that I think has been really a gap in this country in terms of how we incorporate them and get them motivated to do planning. So these are some of the statistics about why we care about small business recovery. And really, you continually see in disasters across the country that small businesses are hit time and time again. In our state, the reason we immediately cared and why we built our program in Washington State from the ground up to incorporate small businesses is because we looked at our revenue streams and recognized that 70% of our revenue came from small businesses. I'm just curious, does anybody in the room know statistically what percentage of your revenue in Hawaii actually comes from small business as opposed to corporate taxes or other things? Anybody know that statistic? Okay. Well, anyway, we looked at ours, and it was very high, and it made us really understand that we should care about small businesses. We should care in terms of getting the economy going and government being able to do what they can do to really know what that revenue stream is. And then again, another thing that's been a recent shift is that the National Preparedness Goal now recognizes economic recovery as a core capability and talks about in the new National Recovery Framework about getting businesses and small businesses much more involved in how we can do that. But they don't go into much detail. So I'm going to talk about very quickly some key ingredients for successful private-public partnerships, because I think that these are things that often get missed when we talk about and what really works in terms of this. First, you have to cultivate the relationship. I've heard a lot of people already in the conference talk about building relationships in advance of disasters, and I think I hear about that at every conference I go to, and that is absolutely critically important. But once you cultivate that relationship, you really have to get businesses involved in your emergency management programs, in any of your programs that you're doing, you have to provide something of value to them. And what is a value? Well, in my world, in emergency management, information is a value. And right now, for years, businesses have been really shut out of the information stream of information. We kind of, I don't know if we did it purposely, but created silos where they weren't easily able to get information as a disaster unfolded. So we quickly broke that silo down very quickly. Build confidence and trust through consistency of delivery. When you're telling them that you're going to provide them something, make sure that you deliver on that and deliver on that consistently. They have a lot of options in terms of where they can go, particularly large companies, but small companies also. And so if they're not seeing that you're providing them what you said you were going to provide them, they'll go elsewhere, and they won't, and it'll be hard to regain them back into the fold of what it is you're trying to do. Set realistic expectations. It's really very critical to establish transparent communications, and that's what we've done, and I'll show you some of the tools that we've used to do that. And then the last one is the most important, and you'll hear Craig Fugate with FEMA talk about this: reinforce private sector as a member of a team versus a partner. The old public-private partnership model was, let's invite private sector to the table when we need something from them. The model that we use in Washington State is we integrate them into every component of what we do in emergency management. They have a voice at the table in all of our planning committees. We just finished a large-scale earthquake exercise, 2-day functional exercise with probably over 500 people involved, made up of federal, and we had 21 companies of a variety of sizes that were fully integrated into that exercise and actually participated starting 2 years ago in the planning process for that exercise. So what I'm saying to you is make sure that when you're talking about a partnership that you treat them as a full member of the team through every phase of what you're doing, through response and in recovery. And hopefully I'll provide you on some tips how to do that. Before disaster strikes, there are some things that are really critical that you need to try to, and I think all of you know a lot of these things, but I'll just run through them quickly. It's more the how of you get business to do these things than knowing what these things are. Some of the partners that I wonder if you've considered or that you're already working with in getting them to do some of the pre-disaster things like preparedness that they need to do are local chambers of commerce, economic development offices. How many of you have already partnered with economic development offices? Okay. Insurance companies. Insurance companies have a vested interest in making sure, and again, there's some great associations out there. The Institute for Business and Home Safety is a great one that focuses a lot on mitigation and is a consortium of insurance companies, so that's a great partner. There's a great planning tool, business continuity planning tool that they provide that I would highly recommend. The other one is small business development centers. They already have a captured audience, and that's what they do. They work with small business is all the time training them and helping them get businesses up and running, and so they are great to partner on. And in fact, in our state, we're working on a way to get a course integrated into their certification program for their state Small Business Development Center advisors that would have a component in it that would teach them the basics about disaster management, mitigation, emergency preparedness, all of those things, so that they could actually integrate those concepts into their strategic planning as they're teaching some of that to small businesses. And industry-specific associations. Our partner that we partnered with when we started our program was the Association of Washington Business, which for us in our state is the State Chamber of Commerce. They represent already 7,300 businesses, so they are a multiplier effect for us to be able to work with them. And I'll talk a little bit later about how they furnished us with 2 business liaisons that now staff our business liaison desk in our State Emergency Operations Center. So these are the 4 steps that you need to really work with businesses on before a disaster strikes. And again, I don't think these are new to most of you. Getting them to really spend some time on preparedness and identifying their risk, and then transferring that risk appropriately where possible through insurance, mitigating risk where possible, so taking those actions to do non-structural things to reduce that risk so that the costs are not so great when the disaster strikes, and then actually plan for what you can't mitigate. That really means getting them to sit down and do just the most basic business continuity plan, because that will really help them get their doors open much faster. So again, one of the things that we did to make sure that that would happen is that I recognize, coming from the private sector side, that the emergency management field had a wealth of information. The problem is that we never collected it together in a location that would make it easy for the businesses who are really busy and don't do the emergency management preparedness thing on a regular basis. So we created a one-stop shop business portal, and there are some flyers actually out on the one of the back tables out there that you can go in and see, and we actually made it very easy to go into one location and find resources for business continuity planning, how to assess risk, our state mitigation plan, all of these reference documents that they need to quickly retrieve and shortcut the time it takes them to do these steps that lead to being able to open their doors faster when disaster strikes. Safe at Work is a program. We listened to some of our partners. It was developed because the Washington Retailer Association said, look we are required to have safety meetings on a regular basis. Could you package a lot of your content, your preparedness materials, and put that into training modules so that we could use that for safety meetings? And so we did that. We had a tremendous amount of videos, YouTube videos on mitigation, all kinds of things, and we packaged that into a program so that each month they can choose a topic, and we change the topic each month, and they can go and retrieve that and just pick that up really easily off of the website and use it to conduct their safety meetings. Again, a lot of times what people ask me is, how do you get businesses to do this? I mean, especially small businesses. I mean, they don't have time. Right now with the economic downturn, most of them barely have time. They've had to reduce staff to just be there and mind their businesses and keep their businesses going and keep their head above water in some of the economic downturn. But we explain to them, we try to give them some business case reasons that, first of all, employees, and I found this working in Microsoft, during an era when there was a lot of terrorism events. I was actually at Microsoft when the London bombing occurred in charge of global security, that we found that if we could constantly reinforce with employees that we were taking care and we had lots of tools and things in place to help them manage their safety as they moved around as a mobile workforce around the world, that they actually focused more and were more productive as workers. And also, if you take care of your employees and help them get ready in advance for a disaster, then they're going to be likely to be there to support your business than being at home and taking care of their families. And I think we saw that played out in a big way in Hurricane Katrina, when even policemen who are particularly dedicated to their jobs were at home taking care of their families and not, you know, protecting the streets of New Orleans, because they obviously had not done a very thorough job of encouraging preparedness with that employee base. Again, 90% of all natural disasters, I think we know this, in the U.S. involve flooding. Certainly that's true in our state. These are pictures from a flood that occurred in our state in 2007 that hit a lot of small businesses. And again, this idea of non-structural mitigation. We had a flood threat in a valley that was a very industrialized valley in King County, which is the largest county. We did almost 2 years of planning because there was a dam that supposedly was weakened. And we spent a lot of time educating businesses on some of the cost-effective things that they could do in elevating their inventory and their other things in case that valley flooded. And so we found a lot of successes working with insurance companies and others that could get that information out to small businesses. And then the investment insurance, I think that this is a huge need in the U.S. today, something that we need to work a lot more with. We're having dialogue with our state insurance commissioner on this, and which is that we really have to figure out a way to create incentives in the system for small businesses to be more insured than they are today, because truly that is the best way that we can get them up and running faster. If the primary form of disaster assistance is right now under the federal relief package in the form of a small business administration loan. And you talk to anyone that has had to wait for one of those loans, I mean, they take a while to process, and in the meantime you have to have a more ready, immediate form of cash available to keep your doors open, to keep operating, and business interruption insurance. But the problem is for small businesses, and they tell me this all the time, it's just not affordable. We're not making enough inroads into this. So I'm going to go through this quickly. This is about business continuity plans, and I've talked about that a lot and why that's important to have. Let's see. So once disaster strikes, you need a way to communicate. As I was talking about earlier, it's important to have forms of communication available so that, for instance, we set up a small, this is part of our business portal, we have a respond page, and when we activate our emergency operations center, we immediately put the contact information for our business liaison desk up on the respond page so they know where to look at it. They know they can contact us by voicemail, email. They can get a hold of us if they have an issue. So we make ourselves very accessible, and we have dedicated business liaisons there to answer their questions. This is our main communication portal we use. It's a system called Peer Public Information Emergency Response System. This is a special business website that is password protected in case we had some sort of an event that we did have to secure it. But information is constantly posted. They have access to state situation reports, all the county situation reports, all kinds of information and links of information that is most need to know in order to keep those businesses making good decisions to get their operations up and running again. And so again, I've talked a little bit about our small business liaison program. We have 2 business liaisons from the Association of Washington Business. We have business liaisons that are fully incorporated into, even though they come from the Association of Washington Business, we train them to use all of the systems that we use in our EOC, and in the last 2 days, they were fully integrated into our large-scale exercise. Again, you can see that we built this into our org chart, so we have a business coordination component in our ESF Emergency Support Function 15 External Affairs chart for our Emergency Operations Center. But once disaster strikes, and that's what we're really going to focus a little bit on, this is a picture from Nashville, Tennessee. I'm going to talk about some of the best practices quickly that they did there in Nashville, because I really think they are a best practices example of a city that is tourism-based, that really needed to get their doors open very quickly, which is what I think you have here in Hawaii. And they really did some outstanding practices that they, I think that is important to know about. These are some of the issues that often come up in small business recovery. And the need to do business inspections or building inspections to, make sure that you can quickly get through the fact that you can open the door and be sure that you can get your doors open. You have to have often your building inspected. So we actually passed in Washington State and worked with the Washington Association of Building Officials to actually get a mutual aid system in place in the state so we could quickly move around and make building officials and the access to building officials scalable to all size disasters, which was a huge big step and something again that we learned out of our Green River flooding planning process. Reopening transportation routes. We put a big emphasis in our state on the need to keep supply chains operational because we believe that where possible you should leverage the private sector and let them do what they already do really well, which is to move goods around an area very efficiently. And so we have actually put some things into place to make sure that happens. We have a commercial vehicle pass system, which I probably don't have time to go into today, but it allows prioritization of goods and routes if there is reduced capacity on roadways, because let's say our main transportation corridors are closed and we have to use and operate on alternate routes, we have a way to prioritize that traffic. Again, I've talked about private supply chain continuity. This is what we're talking about in terms of our supply chain commercial vehicle pass system. I think we were one of the first states to actually develop a program that actually allowed us to prioritize emergency and essential goods because we want to make sure that the things that the public needs the most, food, medical supplies, and other things, get through. And so this is really critical to have in place. So again, I'm going to just quickly run through these slides because I know Carl is a stickler on time.
1 minute.
Okay. So I will be happy to visit with any of you afterwards. Are we going to make the slide presentations available? Okay, on the website. So you can see, I'd love you to be able to go and see some of the great things that they set up. They did things like we're open for business signs to make sure that people knew that both businesses that were open and those that have relocated, where to find those businesses. They had a website where if businesses need some sort of help and needed to be matched up, that they had a flood recovery site where they could send information into the chamber and they would match those businesses up with help or goods or volunteers that they needed. It was really a fantastic system. We actually brought the CEO from Nashville out to actually talk to us about this. And then, of course, volunteer organizations, they had a way to coordinate them and bring them in to help clean up and small businesses that didn't have their own resources. And so this is my last slide. There's some links there to some of the recovery guides that we put in place in our state and lessons learned from Nashville, which I think are really excellent lessons on how to tie recovery together, how to do these things, how to reach out to partners in your communities, and actually help small businesses that do not have the resources on their own to recover from disasters. So with that, I will end.
Thank you. What a great Thank you. We're kind of pressed for time. I want to move along. One thing I did want to say is we don't call those false alarms here. We call them exercises.
Okay.